Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. For today's demonstration I want to show how you can imitate the shallow depth of field effect that you can achieve with a wide aperture on your camera. In other words, the foreground and subject of your painting is in sharp focus and the background appears blurred. In this watercolour of a startled hare, I used a wet on wet technique for the background and a wet on dry technique for everything else. So let me show you how I did it. I started by sketching the hare and loose details for the foreground grasses on a sheet of Saunders Waterford 300 gram rough paper, and then just wet the whole page with some clean water. I'd already pre-mixed some sap green and some jadeite green, and as you can see I'm just dropping it in wet to create a nice fade from light green at the very top to a darker green at the bottom. And while it's still wet I'm putting some even darker streaks in. They'll just blend into the paper, and these will form the out of focus background that I mentioned at the introduction. I've let that initial wash dry, and as you can see it's dried with the background nicely blurred and some of the foreground too, but that will be the backdrop to the sharper images that I'll paint later. Starting with the ears on the hare, using yellow ochre, some Van Dyke brown and some imperial purple, all letting it blend together on the paper rather than mixing it in the palette. If you mix these three colours in the palette you'll end up with a fairly sludgy brown, but if you let them mix on the page you get a nice variety of tonal values. I'm just using this Chinese brush to feather the edges. These Chinese brushes are ideal because it's a cheap brush and you can really flatten the bristles, and they splay apart and allow you to make this nice sort of feathery suggestion of hares, or fur should I say. While the paint on the ears of the hare are drying, I'm just going to just put the initial wash for the body of the hare using yellow ochre. I'm not too worried about the detail of the hare's feet because they're going to be hidden by the foreground grasses when I paint them. Now that initial wash is dried on the body of the hare and the head, I'm just using that same technique with a Chinese brush, just feathered out just to indicate the fur on the body and head of the hare. Starting with a lighter, weaker mix of Van Dyke brown, and I'll add darker tones as we go on. Just want to let each wash dry. For the nose on the hare, which has got much smoother fur, I've used yellow ochre with a touch of Van Dyke brown just to darken it slightly. I'm just gradually building up with the Chinese brush, picking up the texture of the paper. For the eyes of the hare I'm using fairly neat neutral tint. Same on the tips of the ears. Now that they're dry I can put that on and just again feather it out with the Chinese brush. I'm just starting to add some of the darker tonal values on the fur of the body of the hare. I'm just darkening parts of the ears with the same dark mix of it's a stronger mix of Van Dyke brown, less water, more pigment. starting to add some detail around the eyes and the nose of the hare. Once you start putting these darker details in, the hair starts to come together. Not being too fussy with the fur on the hare's body. It's just an indication of what's there. The eye will do the rest. Same with the legs. And as I said earlier, I'm not going to bother much with the feet because they'll be hidden by the foreground grasses. Just adding a touch of white gouache on the body of the hare just for a few highlights. Again, using the Chinese brush. And just adding a few more dark patches just to define the top of the legs a little bit. For the whiskers of the hare, I'm using a zero rigger brush with some neutral tint, and for the white hairs it's just a gel pen, white gel pen, very good for doing thin lines like this. And for the initial wash on the foreground grasses, I'm just using fairly neat sap green, and if you press down on the brush at the start and gradually lift off the pressure, you can create these nice grassy effects. Just adding a few more thin lines with a rigger as well. I'm just gradually building up the darker grasses in the foreground, and as they come towards, as they get darker and darker, and you'll see that it creates this optical illusion of depth in the painting. Just added some ultramarine blue to the jadeite green mix just to darken it. I'm just using some imperial purple for some of the plants that are growing around the hare. And finally just a splatter of some yellow and white and a touch of red as well, just to indicate some plants and bits and pieces in the foreground. And I think I'm pretty much done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. I know I sped it up quite a bit, but it was quite a long video, so I just wanted to demonstrate this idea of shallow depth of field in a painting. If you found it useful, do give it a like, always helps with YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, do subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos. And thanks again for watching.